Hey guys, tonight we rise with the smoke curling lazily from a half-hidden chimney tucked into a mossy monastery wall somewhere in northern Europe. It's dark still. Lanterns flicker, chants drift faintly through the corridors, and the scent hanging in the air isn't just incense or damp vellum. It's beer. Yes, that's right. Tonight we're entering a world where medieval monks start their day not with porridge or prayer alone, but with foamy, malty ale. Because breakfast is serious business when your daily tasks include illumination, discipline, and a whole lot of brewing. You walk slowly through the stone hallway, sandals slapping softly against the floor, eyes adjusting to the candlelit buzz. Brother Anselm passes, arms full of hops, muttering a verse in Latin while sneezing into his sleeve. You wave. He grunts. This is sacred stuff. And yeah, you probably won't survive the first sip unless your taste buds are prepared to be politely slapped by roasted barley and regret. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing this cozy little community glow across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You settle on a bench near the refectory where a huge tankard sits at each place setting, modest but unmistakable. The morning bell rings, not once, but 3 times. A monk bows, and the first mug is lifted. Quietly, respectfully, beer is consumed. Not a toast, not a rowdy pub cheer, just a sip, a blink, and a silent burp of gratitude. Mainstream historical fact: many monastic communities in medieval Europe brewed and consumed beer daily, not only for hydration and nutrition, but as a regulated part of their schedule. Low-alcohol, small beer was a dietary staple, served with meals and sometimes replacing water entirely due to contamination risks. Fringe tidbit: some monasteries blessed their beer not with words, but with a subtle tap of the mug on the table, followed by a shared look meant to convey good fermentation. One monk's stare could make or break your brewing career. Historians still argue whether this daily beer consumption was purely pragmatic or also quietly enjoyable. Was it sustenance, sacrament, or just well-earned indulgence between transcribing psalms? You rise from the bench and follow Brother Ulrich into the brewing hall where copper kettles hiss and herbs simmer in mysterious combinations. Someone's singing, someone's snoring. A barrel rolls past with Tuesday carved on its lid. You're not sure what that means. Nobody clarifies. As the sunrise slips through latticed windows, painting steam clouds gold, you realize this isn't just a quirky tradition. It's breakfast. And tomorrow, you find out exactly why monks drank beer first thing and what that says about their view of water, work, and divine refreshment. You shuffle through the misty corridor, with your robe catching hints of yeast and candle smoke. It's early, too early, and the bells haven't yet decided if it's prayer time or fermentation hour. Your sandals scrape gently against the stone floor as a monk passes you with a tray of mugs that clink like quiet laughter. One glance tells you everything. It's breakfast, and beer is back. You settle onto the wooden bench beneath a window etched with Latin prayers and gossip. The air is cool, but the tankard in front of you steams slightly. Yes, warm ale. Not because monks enjoy tepid beverages, but because boiling killed off mysterious, invisible spirits that tended to upset digestion and theological clarity. Mainstream historical fact. In many parts of medieval Europe, especially regions where water quality was inconsistent, beer became a safer and more nutritious alternative for daily consumption. Monks weren't getting tipsy, they were staying hydrated and fed with small beer, a low-alcohol brew packed with calories and boiled to kill pathogens. You raise the mug. It smells faintly of bread and morning anxiety. Brother Otto sits beside you and mutters, "Better than goat water." You nod, unsure if that's a metaphor or just a dairy complaint. Fringe tidbit? Some monks believed that beer brewed at sunrise carried spiritual warmth. One abbey even recorded a superstition that drinking before sunrise granted better handwriting and fewer spelling errors during manuscript copying. Stylianos tested it. The results were inconclusive, but his cues did improve. Historians still argue whether monks preferred beer for its health benefits or simply embraced it for the quiet comfort it offered during grueling schedules. Was it survival logic or a blessed loophole in the austerity handbook? One scholar insists beer was breakfast kindness wrapped in barley. You watch Brother Matthew pour another mug. Not hurried, not sneaky, just steady. No one pretends this is rebellious. It's routine, like folding robes or feeding chickens. Beer at breakfast is a cultural default, not a scandal. The mug warms your hands. The hops tease your tongue. Somewhere a scribe sneezes, and someone blesses the beer. Not overtly, just with a soft nod toward the kettle. This is hydration, yes. Nutrition, sure. But it's also a kind of monastic hug. And tomorrow, you march into the brewery itself, where copper kettles clank beside psalm recitations and yeast meets liturgy in one glorious timetable. You step into the Abbey Brewery with a shiver of anticipation, and maybe a lingering breadcrumb from breakfast stuck to your sleeve. This isn't a chaotic tavern or a backyard hobby zone. It's a precisely tuned fermentation sanctuary. Here, copper kettles simmer beneath vaulted stone arches. Wooden paddles lean against the wall like sleepy oars waiting for ritual. And on one high shelf, a cloth-wrapped ledger that might as well be called the holy schedule of bubbling glory. You watch as Brother Ulrich flips it open and points to today's plan. Boil at second bell, cool by sext, bless before vespers. Simple, sacred, slightly sticky. Mainstream historical fact: monastic breweries across Europe maintained strict schedules that regulated every part of the brewing process, integrating it with religious obligations. Tasks like mashing grain, boiling wort, and transferring brew to barrels were often timed alongside canonical hours. Morning prayers, midday chants, and evening reflections. You follow Brother Matthias to the grain mill, where roasted barley crunches like righteous granola beneath his boots. He mutters, "Friday mix, less aggressive." You nod, as if you understand barley's feelings. Nearby, hops hang from woven baskets labeled with poetic phrases like "mild as repentance"
and bold as St. Jerome's commentary. Fringe tidbit: one monastery assigned nicknames to its beer varieties based on which monk brewed them. Klaus's clarity was prized for its dryness and sense of quiet. Brother Rufus's regret had unpredictable fizz and a tendency to stain robes. Historians still argue whether monastic brewing schedules reflected a desire for theological symbolism or mere logistical efficiency. Was the alignment of prayer and fermentation truly spiritual, or just a way to avoid exploding barrels during convline? A kettle whistles. The aroma shifts, earthy, herbal, slightly nervous. Brother Anselm checks the boil while reciting psalms under his breath. You swear the rhythm matches the paddle strokes. Monks move with calm purpose. No one rushes, though someone does sprint to retrieve a dropped ladle, which they later bless. The brewery hums. You hear distant chants layered with the sound of bubbling mash. There's a moment, brief, golden, where sun hits the surface of the simmering wort just as the bell rings. You feel it, like a sip of something warm, ancient, and lightly carbonated with holiness. You sip from a ladle. It's not finished, but it's trying. Like you. Tomorrow, you watch how monks share this beer, pouring not just for themselves, but for travelers, pilgrims, and those whose tankards echo with gratitude.
You slide onto a stone bench at the edge of the abbey's outer garden, where pilgrims gather and stable boys whisper prayers half-mouthed between chores. Today, the monks aren't just brewing for themselves. You're watching them prep casks of ale destined for the gates. Liquid charity, low strength, humble, and strangely refreshing. Breakfast beer may be a daily rhythm inside the monastery walls, but beyond them, it's hospitality in fermented form. Brother Mathieu wipes foam from his tunic and gestures toward a row of clay mugs. These are for the travelers. It's not our best, but it's kind. Mainstream historical fact: many monasteries produced what was called small beer or table beer, low in alcohol, high in nutrition, and often distributed to pilgrims, local villagers, and even the poor as a form of outreach and charity. It provided hydration and mild sustenance without intoxication, and the brewing was considered part of monastic duty. A lanky boy in wool breeches arrives with a scroll listing visitors. Brother Anselm groans. 20 pilgrims by noon, 2 carts with dubious wheels, and a dog with a scroll pouch. The dog drinks no beer, but monks like to prepare for surprises. Fringe tidbit: one abbey brewed a special pilgrim's ale, using herbs said to soften the souls and fortify the soul. The label included a sketch of a cheerful foot. Historians still debate if the brew had any orthopedic effect or just inspired spontaneous napping. You carry a mug toward the south gate, where a woman sits beneath a fig tree reciting travel blessings. Her voice wobbles. She accepts the beer with a soft smile, sips it, nods. No toast, no comment, just a quiet moment where fermented barley meets grace. Inside the monastery, Brother Klaus arranges barrels like chess pieces. The layout matters. Stronger ale stays buried. Lighter brew comes forward. One cask is labeled Mercy. Another, Thursday's Feeling. You raise an eyebrow. He doesn't explain.
Historians still argue whether monastic beer distribution was a true act of charity or a clever way to maintain good standing with locals while moving excess product. Some point to detailed brewing logs that track conversions via ale. Others say monks just wanted fewer grumpy pilgrims knocking at the door. You help load 3 mugs onto a tray bound for a sickly shepherd. Brother Otto whispers, "If the water confuses him, the beer will guide." You nod. It's poetic, slightly bizarre, but fitting. Outside the refectory, a cloaked man hands a monk a coin and asks for your humblest brew. The monk returns with a tankard and a blessing. No exchange of names. Just breakfast beer given quietly at sunrise. And you pause beside the brewing hall and watch as a cask labeled for whoever needs it is rolled toward the garden. It's not grand. It's not spicy, but it smells like generosity. Tomorrow, you tiptoe into fasting season, where monks try to ditch solid food, but somehow keep their breakfast beer. It gets creative.
You creep into the refectory with a slightly exaggerated tiptoe. Today's air buzzes with a weird mix of guilt and barley. It's fasting season, and the monks are trying really hard to be spiritually lean while secretly sipping fermented workarounds. Breakfast looks sparse, but the mugs still full. You sit beside Brother Otto, who's staring into his beer like it might turn into a roast chicken if he concentrates hard enough. He groans, "Lent again." You raise your eyebrows. "Still drinking?" He nods without shame. "It's not chewing." Mainstream historical fact. During fasting periods, especially Lent, many monastic orders restricted solid food while permitting liquid sustenance. Beer, especially dense, nutrient-rich varieties, was considered acceptable in moderate quantities, leading to its nickname, liquid bread. Brother Anselm whispers as he pours from a barrel labeled Mercy Malt. 3 mugs before noon, no crust, no guilt. You lean in, trying to decode whether this is legal theology or just historical optimism. Fringe tidbit: one Bavarian monastery created a specific Lenten brew, so rich it was rumored to support monks for weeks without food. A sample sent to the Pope spoiled en route, tasted terrible, and was approved with a shrug. Thus began one of history's tastiest loopholes. You sip the brew. It's thick, almost chewed before swallowed. Brother Klaus refers to it as prayer-flavored stew. You're pretty sure that's not on the approved list, but nobody objects. Historians still argue whether monks embraced beer during fasting as sincere sustenance or cheeky indulgence. Some defend it as medical necessity. Others claim it stretched the definition of abstinence until it wrapped around a cask and winked. You stroll through the brewery's side alcove, where the fasting barrels rest. Their labels are unusually poetic: dawn fog, mild regret, saintly silence. One monk offers you a mug named Forgiveness Foam. You take it, sip, feel slightly forgiven. In the prayer hall, chants echo with less vigor, possibly hunger-related, but the beer helps. Brother Matthew tells a young novice, "Sip slowly, or the psalms get jazzy."
You note that down. As night edges the stained glass in smoky blues, the monks begin Compline with tankards discreetly hidden in their sleeves. No one gets tipsy, no one collapses, but there's a warmth, a calm, a kind of loophole holiness that turns beer into divine permission. And tomorrow you sit beside Brother Klaus himself, listening to arguments over hops, fermentation, and whether carbonation counts as arrogance.
You ease onto a sun-warmed bench near the brewery's back alcove, the scent of hops wafting over stone like an herbal sermon. Today, you're sitting beside Brother Klaus, unofficial hop whisperer and senior brew advisor, part theologian, part fermentation philosopher. His robe bears a stain shaped suspiciously like a mug, and his eyebrows twitch every time someone misuses the term wort. You're here for the hoppy debate, and Klaus, he's just waiting for a worthy argument. He pulls out 2 tankards, labeled Mild Mercy and Righteous Roar. He gestures. Taste both, then tell me what honors God. You sip. One is gentle, the other could wrestle a fig. Your taste buds panic. Klaus grins. Mainstream historical fact. Monks across medieval Europe often debated brewing techniques, including hop variety, strength, and fermentation timing. Recipes varied wildly between regions and orders, with some communities favoring mild herbal profiles and others creating robust, hearty brews packed with calories and bitter glory. Brother Anselm interrupts with a scroll. Brother Rufus says your ratioms ignore theological balance. Klaus scoffs. His ale prays too quietly. You blink. This is not a casual disagreement. It's a foamy duel of divine proportions. Fringe tidbit? One monastery held an annual ale discernment symposium where monks debated which brew best symbolized patience. The winner was a beer aged in fig boughs and described as firm but forgiving. The runner-up? A batch that made a scribe confess to misplacing a gospel. Historians still argue whether these hop debates were sincere theological exercises or just elaborate excuses to keep brewing exciting. Some interpret the arguments as reflections of medieval views on excess, humility, and spiritual symbolism. Others just hear monks yelling about foam density and think, human nature wins again. You watch Klaus scribble brewing notes beside psalm excerpts. His method, blend precision with poetry. One entry reads, "For patience, reduce boil by 1 bell. For joy, double hops and sing." You ask if singing is required. Klaus nods. Joy won't rise alone. Brother Otto joins the fray, proclaiming that coriander seeds bring appropriate modesty to the brew. Anselm counters with juniper for decisive wisdom. Stylianos arrives, says nothing, sips both beers, and mutters, "Regret tastes better chilled." Everyone pauses. No one knows what he means. As the sun slants through the herb-drying racks and the brewery simmers with monkish mutterings, you realize this isn't just about flavor. It's about meaning. You sip again. Mild Mercy tastes thoughtful. Righteous Roar could preach a sermon. Tomorrow, you step outside the abbey walls and into a village where locals sneak back toward the monastery, not for prayer, but for beer that puts taverns to shame. You step across the village square, sandal soles flicking dust between cobblestones, ears catching the faint clatter of mugs and whispered praise for someone called Brother Klaus the Frothy. You're outside the monastery today, slipping into the world where monks don't just brew, they influence local thirsts and tavern rivalries. The locals made toast at the inn, but it's the abbey beer they want at sunrise. You follow a small crowd headed back toward the cloistered gates, not for confession, but for the kind of ale that makes silence feel like applause. Near a crooked oak, a merchant mutters, "That tavern's beer tastes like apology." He cups a jug marked with monastic runes and smiles. You sip. It's calm, chewy, faintly theological. The innkeeper nearby sighs in defeat. Mainstream historical fact, monastic breweries were widely admired in medieval Europe for producing beer that was purer, more consistent, and often more flavorful than locally made batches. These beers were sought after by villagers, traders, and sometimes nobility, who occasionally bypassed taverns altogether for direct abbey supplies. You walk past the tavern, where the barkeep groans and adjusts his barrel labeled Tuesday Grit. His assistant scowls. They brew with psalms. How do we compete with that? You shrug, but secretly you're wondering if Stylianos moonlights as a beer bard. Fringe tidbit? One abbey encoded their brewing secrets into choral music. Yes, actual sung recipes. The melody's pitch indicated boil length. Harmony matched hop variety. A confused choir once brewed Accidental Regret Ale. It was surprisingly popular. Historians still argue whether monastic brewing helped elevate public standards or simply crushed local tavern innovation. Some say villagers learned from monastic technique. Others believe abbey beer stifled creative yeast ambitions everywhere. You trail 3 bakers sneaking mugs back from the abbey's garden tap. One mutters, "Bread's better when the brewer's been praying." The others nod. The mugs clink. Someone blesses a loaf for fun. Brother Klaus appears at the gates holding a jug labeled "Easier than Salvation." He nods toward the village. "They'll be back before Vespers. Tell them we've started the fig blend." You blink. "Fig?" He winks. It forgives taste errors. Inside the tavern, a scroll hangs with polite envy. "We love the monks. We just want their hops." And tomorrow, you sneak into the cellar where scrolls leak ink over recipes no one understands, but everyone reveres.
You tiptoe into the monastery cellar, guided only by a flickering lantern and the muffled mumbling of a scribe talking to his yeast starter. The air is damp, rich, and slightly philosophical. You're here not for barrels, but for scrolls. Brewing scrolls. Some sing, some scold. All of them smell faintly of hops, ink, and mildly repressed emotion. This is where secrets bubble. You pass a shelf labeled Useful Accidents,
and reach a wall cubby where parchment curls like resting cats. Brother Anselm leans in, brushing aside a sack of dried figs, and whispers, "Scrolls never lie, unless they're by Rufus." You don't ask. Mainstream historical fact. Brewing instructions were often written in monastery records or recipe scrolls, preserved as both technical guides and sacred documentation. Many included measurements, ingredients, timing, and ritual blessings. Some scrolls were copied into larger ledgers, while others lived quietly among wine labels and psalm drafts. Anselm hands you a parchment titled Steps for Mild Gratitude. It begins with soaking barley until it hums. You blink. It continues, boil until the soul fogs, then steep in forgiveness. You ask if that's metaphor. Anselm grins. Mostly. Fringe tidbit? One monastery coded brewing ratios, inside jokes, and Latin puns, like add 2 teaspoons of dogma, or wait until the yeast repents. It wasn't always clear whether you were making beer or spiritual theater. A famous scroll ends with the note, "If it foams, forgive it." Historians still argue whether these brewing scrolls were practical documents or theological allegories with fluid measurements and mystical metaphor. Some interpret them as symbolic recipes, fermentation as transformation. Others say monks just had dramatic handwriting. You sip from a mug offered silently by Brother Klaus. It tastes like almonds, smoke, and unresolved commentary. He gestures to a scroll corner where someone doodled a loaf, hugging a keg. Brother Rufus, he sighs, emotionally honest, chemically confused. You find a parchment with brewing times mapped alongside feast days. It suggests extra boil time during St. Eligius's festival and cautions against brewing during eclipses. Styliano squints at the eclipse note. Overly medieval, he mutters, then drinks it anyway. A final scroll catches your eye. Ale for long forgiveness. It includes a recipe, a prayer, and a story about a monk who mixed yeast with lamp oil. The footnote reads, "Result, regrettable, but illuminating." You step back from the shelf, scroll dust on your fingers, heart warmed by the quiet chaos. This isn't just a recipe archive. It's a kitchen diary written by monks who believed God lived in both silence and suds. Tomorrow, you hear tales of saints and scholars who sipped before sunrise and made history taste like beer. You curl up beside the abbey's old fireplace, where logs crackle beneath a kettle that smells suspiciously like saintly suds. Tonight's session is less brewing, more storytelling. A moment to lean into legend and let the froth flow freely across memory and myth. You're surrounded by scrolls, mugs, and half-finished anecdotes about saints and scholars who didn't just sip beer before sunrise, they made it holy. Brother Otto leans back and begins. There was a bishop who fasted all through Lent, but drank from one barrel labeled Heaven's Crust. He said it was liquid penance. Styliano snorts. Mainstream historical fact? Several religious figures, including monks and bishops, were known for their connection to beer as sustenance, especially during fasting seasons. Historical records reference figures like Saint Arnold of Soissons and Saint Columban,
who promoted beer as hygienic, nutritional, and sometimes divinely blessed. Brother Anselm offers a tale about Saint Gall, who allegedly brewed ale so pure that sinners confessed mid-sip. He didn't even speak. The beer did the talking. You nod. The idea of liquid absolution is both dramatic and faintly plausible. Fringe tidbit: one saint, perhaps apocryphal, was said to baptize with a splash of blessed beer when water ran low. The record's ambiguous, but a footnote reads, "The foam carried purpose." You almost believe it. Historians still argue whether these legends were truth, metaphor, or enthusiastic PR for monastic breweries. Some claim the stories reflect genuine daily practice, dressed in divine robes. Others think monks just had great storytelling instincts and impressive barley access. You sip from a mug labeled St. Arnold's Early Wisdom. It's warm, faintly spicy, and hits like soft advice. Klaus claims the recipe came from a dream. Otto mothers, more likely a spill. Outside, the bells ring quietly. A dog yawns. A scroll falls open to a tale about a nun who wrote brewing hymns that cured melancholy. No one questions it. Inside the warmth, stories swirl. Whether saintly or sneaky, the breakfast beer legacy is layered. Holy, historical, slightly foamy. And tomorrow, you shadow monks hauling barrels to market, some with pride, some with regret, one with a cart that squeaks like confession. You follow a squeaky cart rolling past the outer garden, guided by two monks with robes too long and posture too optimistic. Today's mission? Beer distribution. An abbey to market journey where barrels ride bumps, paths confuse sandals, and regret occasionally leaks from poorly sealed casks. You shadow the procession, tankard tucked under your arm like a passport to eccentric commerce. Brother Otto waves cheerfully at a squirrel. 8 barrels, he mutters. 2 prayers, 1 mule. No margin for wobble. Mainstream historical fact: medieval monasteries often sold or gifted beer to surrounding communities, managing distribution through carts, carriages, and occasionally river routes. These deliveries served both economic and social roles, and the quality of monastic brew often outshone local tavern offerings. The path curves, the cart groans. A barrel marked Joyful Lent rolls ominously. Brother Anselm whispers, "If that one leaks, confession is automatic." You laugh. No one else does. Fringe tidbit: one monastery recorded a delivery mishap where barrels rolled down a hill and arrived at market unguarded. Locals interpreted it as divine generosity. The monks interpreted it as Tuesday's disaster. The squirrel got drunk. You help redirect a wobbly barrel labeled Saintly Foam. Its seal is loose. Brother Klaus frowns. That was supposed to age 3 more days. Otto shrugs. It's impatient, like Brother Rufus. Everyone nods uneasily. Historians still argue whether monastic beer distribution was organized commerce or semi-chaotic goodwill.
Some point to ledgers and contracts. Others highlight records full of margin doodles, spilled ink, and phrases like accidental generosity. At the market square, villagers wait, some with mugs, others with flasks shaped like devotion. A child asks, "Is the beer smarter today?" Klaus replies, "Ask your dreams after 2 sips." You watch a monk barter a barrel for vegetables, candles, and one unsolicited confession. The recipient nods solemnly and drinks. The cart returns lighter but louder. Otto mutters, "One barrel leaked joy, another leaked doubt. One exploded with coriander." Stiliano smirks. "Sounds normal." As dusk creeps in, the last barrel clunks against a root and sighs audibly. You lean close. It smells faintly of clarity. And tomorrow? You sit through more awkward exchanges, where blessings mingle with backdoor deals, and the beer becomes both sermon and silver.
You perch beside the monastery's west gate, robe slightly wrinkled, scroll bag a tad heavier than yesterday. Today's story isn't about blessings or benevolent casks. It's about the blurry line between devotion and distribution, where beer slips through cellars, sips through sealed agreements, and occasionally sneaks through back doors disguised as donations. You're sitting inside the transactional whirl of monastic ale, barrels, blessings, and that awkward moment when trade feels more like theater than theology. Brother Klaus arranges a row of tankards beside a ledger labeled Authorized Generosity. You ask if it's for accounting. He smiles. It's for regret prevention. Mainstream historical fact? While monastic beer was often shared freely with travelers or used in charitable contexts, many monasteries also engaged in regulated commercial brewing, selling beer to fund monastery upkeep, support community projects, and occasionally compete with secular vendors. These efforts straddled the line between spiritual vocation and economic survival. Brother Otto leans against a cask marked "Not for Rufus." You ask why. He replies, "It's too strong. He recited a whole sermon backwards once." You blink. Otto nods solemnly. Fringe tidbit? One abbey allegedly offered blessed ale subscriptions to local nobility, quarterly deliveries sealed with wax and prayers, each batch tweaked based on spiritual seasons. Some scrolls suggest one duke requested extra hops during diplomatic tension, claiming they made court meetings bearable. You watch Brother Anselm frown at a trade request involving soap, 2 chickens, and 1 highly skeptical goose. He mutters, "That's not an exchange. That's a feathered insult." Historians still argue whether these monastic beer deals were spiritually justifiable or simply economic necessity wrapped in liturgical language. Some scholars cite records showing detailed pricing, seasonal discounts, and promotional chants. Others argue monks were simply doing their best to balance vows with barrels. You're invited into a small alcove labeled Blessings and Logistics. Inside, tankards rest beside scrolls mapping delivery routes, feast day brewing enhancements, and one suspicious chart labeled
tavern espionage. Klaus winks. We heard they watered down the repentance batch. Outside, a trader insists on sampling the ale before payment. Stylianos hands him a mug. The trader sips, stares, says, "This is clarity." Stylianos shrugs. "We bottle honesty." You follow a procession toward the market square. Mugs clink, scrolls flutter. The boundary between prayer and profit tiptoes along the dusty path. No one seems bothered. Tomorrow, you'll sit through a sermon claiming beer isn't just food. It's divine nutrition. It might convince you, or confuse your lunch.
You settle onto the refectory bench with a mug already half full of something rich and familiar. Today's sermon sounds more like a menu. Brother Anselm declares, "Beer is bread for the soul." The monks nod, some mid-sip. You're not just drinking breakfast anymore. You're tasting theology, fermented and foam-lined. Brother Otto sets down his scroll. We don't consume, we commune. You eye his tankard. It's enormous. Mainstream historical fact. The phrase liquid bread became a popular descriptor for monastic beer, reflecting its dense nutritional content and frequent role as a food substitute, especially during fasting. Rich in calories and often brewed with grains, herbs, and yeast byproducts, this beer provided sustenance when traditional meals were restricted. Brother Klaus joins mid-sermon with a tray labeled "Daily Portion, Do Not Exceed Unless Praying." Stylianos peeks inside. That's either modest joy or barley ambition. You sip. It tastes like benevolence baked at low heat. Fringe tidbit? One monastery hosted a Beer as Gospel lecture series, where each ale variety was paired with a virtue: patience, slow ferment, humility, light body, generosity, high pour. The final lecture involved a brew named "Forgive the Foam." 3 monks wept. Historians still argue whether this spiritual elevation of beer was theological creativity or post hoc justification for beloved traditions. Did monks truly see beer as nourishment sanctified, or did fondness ferment into reverence, one tankard at a time? Brother Anselm's homily crescendos. As barley becomes bread, let the brew nourish not just the belly, but the burden. He lifts his mug. No splash, just solemn sipping. Outside, pilgrims arrive with empty flasks and hopeful eyes. A monk hands them mercy malt. One thanks him with a verse about yeast and grace. It rhymes. The monk blushes. In the side chapel, a scroll hangs with the message, "Break not bread, but pour salvation." No one's sure if it's literal, but they keep sipping. Stylianos records sermon notes in the margins of a brew ledger. It reads, "Joy equals boil times quiet faith." You can't help but smile. Tomorrow, you'll sit through an ecclesiastical dispute where froth, pride, and bishoply doubt collide like barrels in a bumpy cart. You shuffle into the cathedral courtyard, where benches creak like aging sermons, and the bishop's sandals slap softly against pride. Today's air crackles, not with divine grace, but ecclesiastical drama. The topic? Beer. Specifically, monastic beer. The bishop has questions. The monks have froth. And you? You're about to watch holy diplomacy swirl like foam on a mug labeled Saintly Discomfort. Brother Klaus whispers, he thinks hops are vanity. Brother Anselm adds, he thinks suds distract from salvation. Stylianos drinks, loudly. Mainstream historical fact, tensions occasionally flared between higher church officials and monastic communities over beer production and consumption. Some bishops questioned whether extensive brewing violated vows of simplicity and discipline, especially when prophets entered the mix. Debates grew sharper as monasteries gained reputations for exceptional ale. The bishop arrives. His robe flows. His brows arch. He sniffs. This smells enthusiastic. Brother Otto replies, we boiled twice. Everyone freezes. Fringe tidbit? One bishop famously banned beer brewing within monastery walls, only to reconsider weeks later after local clergy complained about sudden drops in morale. The ban was lifted with conditions: no spice blends, and all barrels must sing Latin. You sit through a tense assembly. Brother Klaus presents scrolls detailing brewing schedules, nutritional charts, and one pie graph labeled Vows versus Volume. The bishop blinks. Did you sketch that with roasted barley ink? Klaus nods. It ages well. Historians still argue whether ecclesiastical pushback against beer reflected genuine concern for monastic purity or power struggles disguised as doctrinal debate. Some records show genuine theological discomfort. Others read like turf wars between teacups and tankards. Anselm reads aloud a sermon defending liquid sustenance as divinely digestible. The bishop coughs. Stylianos mutters, let the foam testify. Someone giggles quietly. The bishop demands stricter limits. Brother Otto proposes fasting beer charts. Klaus suggests prayer-adjusted recipes. The bishop sighs. I'll allow the brew, but no boasting. The monks nod while tapping barrels labeled Pride Light and Humbled Hops. By sunset, the courtyard settles. The bishop sips reluctantly. His brows relax. No verdict, just a quiet burp and whispered Latin. Tomorrow, the breweries dim, the barrels sit untouched, and the monks wonder if silence will change the flavor.
You pass the brewery quietly today. Footsteps deliberate, tankards untouched, and the air oddly indifferent to yeast. Something's shifted. The steam doesn't rise like before. The copper kettles look politely retired. And the monks, they're quieter. Not silent, but hesitant. You trail Brother Anselm as he wipes dust from a barrel labeled, "Not this week." The monastery isn't mourning, it's mellowing. Brother Klaus sighs as he walks past the herb rack,
now half-filled and wholly neglected. "We brewed yesterday," he says, "but only out of habit." You glance toward the refectory. Mugs sit, but fewer. The breakfast beer has become optional. That's new. Mainstream historical fact. By the late medieval period, especially post-Reformation, monastic brewing began to decline in many regions due to economic shifts, religious reform, and changing dietary practices. Some monasteries ceased brewing entirely, while others reduced production or focused solely on charity batches. Brother Otto adjusts a scroll labeled Boil Schedule Tentative. It's mostly crossed out. Ansem scrolls Next Feast beside the note. Stylianos passes, sipping herbal tea, muttering, "Hop nostalgia?" Fringe tidbit? One monastery tried replacing breakfast beer with a dense oat stew. It flopped. Several monks developed scroll fatigue, citing lack of liquid clarity. Brother Rufus spilled oat gruel on a sacred text and blamed the stew's bad vibes. The recipe was discontinued. Historians still argue whether monastic beer's decline was due to practical reforms or a broader cultural pivot toward moderation. Some credit new spiritual emphases that de-emphasized indulgence. Others point to budget cuts and the tragic disappearance of Brother Klaus's signature yeast. You watch Ansem trace old fermentation notes onto a chalk slab. "We used to argue over hops," he says. "Now we agree. That's suspicious." You nod. Debates brought flavor. Outside, a pilgrim asks if the monastery still brews. Otto replies, "We do, but more gently." The pilgrim accepts a mug of weak ale and whispers a blessing shaped like resignation. Klaus rolls a barrel toward the garden, but stops. "It's not fermentation," he says. "It's forgetting." You help him cover it with a cloth stitched in psalm fragments. The courtyard at dusk feels softer, fewer burps, more long sips. Stylianos lights a lantern beside an old keg and hums a brewing hymn under his breath. You almost don't hear it, but it's there, like bubbles refusing to rise. Tomorrow you'll wander through quiet pages, faded recipes, and the last whispers etched in tankard rings. You wander through the scriptorium as the morning light splashes gently over dry parchment and abandoned brewing notes. This is the quiet after the froth, the slow fade of ritual into memory. There's no scent of hops today, just dust, distant chanting, and faint rings left by tankards once brimming with theological fizz. You settled beside a scroll marked "Final Blessing, May the Ale Remember." Stylianos passes, cradling a mug half filled with nostalgia. It's gentle, understated, and stubbornly warm. He hands you a parchment. The ink has blurred, but you can still make out the phrase, "Brew gently, drink slowly, speak kindly." You trace the levers, wondering if they were written before or after the last fermentation.
Mainstream historical fact: the legacy of monastic brewing lives on today through preserved recipes, surviving documents, and modern breweries founded by or inspired by monastic traditions. While the daily breakfast beer has faded, the reverence for quality and purpose remains deeply tied to history. You tuck the scroll back into its slot, noticing that someone, possibly Brother Otto, added a doodle of a praying mug with steam-shaped wings. No explanation, just faith with foam. Fringe tidbit: a rare manuscript was found wrapped in old brewing cloths, sealed with melted beeswax, and tucked inside a hollow book cover labeled "Do Not Sip Without Forgiveness." Its recipe was simple. Its margins contained 40 small jokes. Historians still debate whether it was sincere brewing guidance or spiritual stand-up comedy. Historians still argue whether the monks knew they were building a legacy beyond their walls. Some claim it was about devotion layered with barley. Others insist it was culture wrapped in ritual, preserved through steam and silence. You walk through the abbey garden now, dotted with overgrown hop vines and fig trees bearing quiet fruit. Klaus rests on a bench, whispering to a barrel named Final Patience. He doesn't look up, but you know he hears. Inside, the refectory has fewer mugs, more echoes. The morning brew isn't served, but memory bubbles beneath every bench, waiting for someone to ask, "Was this the place with breakfast beer?" And someone will answer, "Yes," and so much more. You sit on the edge of a windowsill, sun on your fingertips, heart slightly carbonated. Let the foam settle. Let the silence steep.
Now let the steam slip away, and the echoes retreat into soft-edged dreams. The monks are asleep, their sandals lined neatly, their brewing logs closed. The barrels rest, no longer bubbling, just breathing, holding memory in oak and prayer. Tonight, you've traced a history, not just through recipes or theology, but through a shared rhythm, one sip at a time. You've listened to foamy debates, wandered through fig-flavored charity, and tiptoed past scrolls dressed in yeast and metaphor. You've laughed with saints, side-eyed bishops, and wondered if Stylianos ever brewed with emotion. He probably did. Let that warmth linger. Picture a stone bench tucked beneath a vine-covered arch, a tankard resting there. Not full, not empty, just enough. That's what remains. Not the beer itself, not the barrels or the chants, just a gentle knowledge that once, in quiet halls and sleepy courtyards, beer was more than drink. It was community. It was compassion. It was comfort poured carefully between syllables. So now, dim your thoughts like candlelight behind frosted glass. Let them soften like yeast drifting in dreams. Let your breath match the hush of monastery bells at dusk. You don't have to remember every detail, just that it was warm, that it mattered, that somewhere in Europe, long ago, monks sipped quietly before sunrise, and you were there to witness the gentle fizz of history.